That morning, Mr. Ton woke up very early. He sat by the window, his gaze dreamy, watching the first rays of sunlight filtering through the trees in front of his house. His hair was completely white. Although his eyes were starting to dim with age, they still held the firmness of a man who had lived through more than 75 years of life. Mr. Ton had worked tirelessly since he was a poor village boy, until he became a father carrying the weight of his entire family. The small house where he lived had been with him for almost half his life. Though cramped and old, it held countless memories. That was where he and his wife had raised their only son, Hong. But now, he lived in the house alone. His wife had passed away a few years ago, and Hong, his son, was now a successful businessman living in the big city. Today was a special day. Mr. Ton had decided to fulfill a dream that he'd never thought he could achieve: to buy a Rolls-Royce. The thought made him nervous and emotional. It wasn't because he wanted to show off or flaunt his wealth. He didn't need anyone's admiration. This car was a symbol of everything he had overcome in a life of hard work. The years of endurance, the contemptuous looks from people, and the success of his son, which he had sacrificed everything to build. He looked down at the old coat he was wearing. Although it was frayed at the collar and cuffs, he kept it very clean. This coat had been a gift from Hong on the day his son received his first paycheck. He smiled, silently recalling his son's words before he left. "Dad, today don't think about saving anymore. You've sacrificed your whole life for me. Treat yourself. And don't worry about anyone's opinions." Hong had encouraged him to choose anything he wanted. And when he mentioned the Rolls-Royce, his son hadn't hesitated. "You deserve the best," Hong had said. Putting on his fedora, Mr. Ton stepped out of the house. The small alleyway was still wet from last night's rain. The sound of his footsteps echoed on the paving stones. Although his gait had slowed, he kept his back straight. Each step exuded the resilience of someone who had been through many hardships. He hailed a taxi and asked the driver to take him to the Rolls-Royce showroom in the city center. The driver, a young man, glanced at him briefly in the rearview mirror, and then asked hesitantly, "Sir, do you really want to go to Rolls-Royce?" Mr. Ton replied gently, his voice calm but firm. "Yes, I intend to buy one." The young man was surprised, but didn't ask any more questions. There was something in the old man's eyes that made him unable to doubt him. When the taxi stopped in front of the showroom, Mr. Ton got out. The large building, with its gleaming glass windows, appeared before him like a completely different world. The supercars displayed inside gleamed under the lights like works of art. He took a deep breath to compose himself. "I've made it this far. Nothing can stop me now," he thought. With his aged but still steady hands, he pushed open the large glass door and stepped into a world he had never dared to dream of. As he stepped through the luxurious glass doors, the gleaming light from the expensive cars, reflected on the marble floor, made Mr. Ton blink slightly. But amidst the glamour, memories of the difficult years of his life suddenly came flooding back, as clear as if it happened yesterday. Mr. Ton was born into a poor family in a remote countryside. His parents were hard-working farmers, worked all year round but never had enough to eat. His childhood was a series of days running barefoot on the village roads, bumpy, dreaming of eating a good meal with meat and fish. His calloused hands today are the mark of those years. Working tirelessly to help his parents in the fields since he was a child. When he grew up, Mr. Tan left the village to go to the city, with the hope of being able to change his life. But in reality, city life was much harsher than he imagined. He did all kinds of jobs to earn a living: porter, construction worker, car mechanic. Although the work was hard and the salary meager, he still told himself to persevere. Those years were not just a fight against poverty, but also a fight against contempt. He vividly remembered the looks of the managers or wealthy clients when they looked at him with contempt, considering him just a lowly worker. He was once kicked out of a restaurant because he didn't look suitable for the place. He didn't get angry, didn't argue, just quietly turned away, but those cold words remained etched in his heart. When he got married, Mr. Tan understood that he needed to work even harder. For Hong, his only son, was all the hope and dream of his life. He wanted Hong to have a different future, not to suffer from poverty and be looked down upon like him. But to achieve that, he had to pay with countless sacrifices. He worked from early morning until late at night, regardless of rain or sickness. He remembered the cold nights, sitting in the repair shop, with his hands aching from oil and grease, just to earn enough money to pay for his son's tuition. Sometimes he only dared to eat dry bread and drink plain water, to save money to buy books for Hong. The scene he remembered most was the day Hong passed the entrance exam to a prestigious university. Hong ran home holding the acceptance letter, his face as bright as the sun. At that time, although Mr. Tan was exhausted after a day of work, but his son's smile made him forget all his fatigue. He patted Huang's shoulder, speaking to his son and also promising himself, "I will do everything so that you won't have to suffer like me anymore." And he kept that promise throughout his life. Even so, the price to pay was not small. Mr. Tan was used to being disregarded by the wealthy. They didn't understand that behind that shabby car mechanic was a father, willing to sacrifice his whole life so that his son could have a bright future. He didn't have time to be sad or angry. All his energy was dedicated to a single goal: Huang's success. When Hong grew up and achieved great success, Mr. Tan was proud, but never dared to think about enjoying. Although Hong repeatedly offered to buy him a big house and a luxury car, he always refused, just saying that he was used to living simply. But deep down, he also had a dream that he didn't dare to reveal to anyone: to own a luxury car, like the people he had served in his life. Today, Mr. Tan decided to give himself a chance. This dream wasn't to show off or display wealth, but as a way to reflect on his entire arduous journey that he had gone through. A Rolls-Royce is not just a car. It is a symbol of perseverance, self-respect, and love that he had devoted entirely to his family. In the living room, small but tidy, of his old house, Mr. Tan sat opposite his son, Hong. This man, over 70 years old, with his white hair and calloused hands, looked at Hong. The young man in a neat suit, his radiant face full of pride but also mixed with a little hesitation. Hong had just returned from a long business trip. He sat there looking at his father, his eyes filled with love and gratitude. Even though he was the CEO of a large corporation, could afford anything he wanted. But Hong knew that all his success today stemmed from his father's silent sacrifice. Hong spoke softly but firmly. Dad, I want you to do something for yourself. You've sacrificed your whole life for me, Dad. It's time you thought about yourself. Think about your own happiness. Mr. Tan shook his head and smiled gently. Son, I'm used to living simply. I have you, you have success, I'm content. I don't need anything. Hong wouldn't give up. He knew his father was always like this. Always thinking of others before himself. But this time, he was determined to change that mindset. Didn't you, last time? You said you liked that Rolls-Royce, didn't you? I've looked into it. If you like it, we can buy it right away. Mr. Tan was slightly startled. It's true that last time, during a casual conversation, he said that. He was impressed by the luxury and powerful appearance of the Rolls-Royce he had seen on TV. But it was just a casual remark. He never thought that dream could become a reality. He quickly waved his hand. No, I was just saying. That car is very expensive, how could I even dream of it? I don't need those luxuries. Hong looked at his father with a serious gaze. Dad, that's not just a car. It's a testament to everything you've done. It's a way to reward yourself. You deserve it. Moreover, I don't just want you to have the car. But I want you to step out of the shadow of sacrifice. You've given your whole life, now it's time to receive. Mr. Tan fell silent, Huang's words made him think. He remembered the years of hardship. Remembered the small dreams he had cast aside. To give everything to his son. For him, the Rolls-Royce wasn't just a car. It was a symbol of pride. It was a way for him to affirm that he had lived a worthwhile life. Hong continued, his voice low and full of emotion. You know, Dad, I've always admired you. You didn't just give me life. But you also taught me about patience. About willpower. About how to overcome difficulties. My success today is thanks to you. Now I want you to be proud of yourself. I want you to walk into that Rolls-Royce showroom like a winner. Huang's words touched Mr. Tan's aging heart. Even though he didn't want to admit it. Deep down, he also yearned for it. Once in a lifetime. To stand amidst respectful gazes. To step past the prejudices that for a lifetime he had endured. Mr. Tan sighed softly and smiled at his son. All right, I'll listen to you. But I just want to choose the car myself, make the decision myself. I don't want to bother you too much. Hong grasped his father's calloused hand. His eyes lighting up. Don't worry, Dad, I'll always be by your side. We'll do this together. It's not about the money, but because you deserve it. That day, for the first time in his life, Mr. Tan allowed himself to think about something big. For himself. Not because of the car. But because of the sincere encouragement of his son. The person he had dedicated his whole life to loving. And sacrificing for. In his heart, a new feeling arose, joy. Pride, and determination. This time, he wouldn't let anyone. Or any prejudice stand in the way of his final dream. The taxi stopped in front of a building. With gleaming glass facades. Reflecting the morning sunlight. The Rolls-Royce showroom stood out in the city center. Like a symbol of luxury and class. Every architectural line exuded elegance. With automatic glass doors. The gold frame above bore the logo of two intertwined RS. A symbol of the brand's power. Of the prestigious supercar. Mr. Tan paused for a few seconds before the door. Silently looking inside. Behind the glass. The space was exquisitely designed down to the smallest detail. The Rolls-Royces shimmered under the soft yellow light. Each one was like a unique work of art. The smooth curves, the gleaming paint, and the perfection in every detail of each car made them exude an aura of pride, as if waiting for a worthy owner. Stepping through the automatic doors, Mr. Tan immediately felt a change in the atmosphere. Inside, so quiet that the sound of my footsteps echoed clearly across the marble floor. A faint scent of wood, sandalwood and orchids wafted through the air, creating a sense of luxury but also of distance. The showroom floor was paved with ivory white marble, gleaming to the point of reflecting the images of the displayed cars. Each car was placed on a separate platform, separated by a generous space, so that customers could admire them from all angles. The luxurious Rolls-Royce Phantoms, Gulen, stood majestically like kings in their domain. The light from the subtle spotlights highlighted every perfect detail. On the walls, large LED screens played videos about the manufacturing process of each car. From the handcrafted wooden frame to the meticulously hand-stitched leather upholstery, images of artisans in white uniforms, meticulously perfecting every small detail, allowing customers to clearly feel the artistic value of each Rolls-Royce. Next to the area displaying 7 cars was a reception desk, designed simply but modernly. A dark wood counter, gleaming, with the Rolls-Royce logo engraved in the center. Behind the counter was a neat young female employee, in a smart black uniform. She sat upright. Her eyes glanced at Mr. Tan as he entered, before returning to the computer screen in front of her. In the distance, a VIP area separated by open glass partitions. Inside was a private space, with premium leather sofas, a table and large screen for customers to view the personalization options for the cars. Everything here was designed to cater to the wealthy, special clients, those for whom money is no object. Mr. Tan walked slowly through the showroom. His eyes lit up when he saw the Rolls-Royce Phantom in mystic black. In the center, the car stood there, majestic and luxurious, like a monument to perfection. Despite being over 75, he had never stood so close to a car like this. The smooth lines of the car's body, the Spirit of Ecstasy logo, the small winged figurine on the hood, sparkling, all of it, like it was telling a story of power and class, which he had only ever seen from afar throughout his life. Nevertheless, Mr. Tan's steps slowed a little. He realized the gazes of some of the staff in the showroom were glancing at him with a hint of curiosity mixed with suspicion. He knew he looked different from the other guests who frequented the place. Simple clothes, worn-out shoes, and the appearance of an old man made him look out of place in this luxurious space. But he didn't mind. He stood tall, his gaze firm. He wasn't here to back down or hesitate. He was here for a lifelong dream. And he knew he deserved it. In the luxurious space of the Rolls-Royce showroom, Mr. Tan, a simple man but full of self-respect, had entered to write his own story. Mr. Tan approached the reception desk, where a young female employee was sitting. The young woman's name was Tao, wearing a smart black suit, with a small embroidered Rolls-Royce logo on the lapel. Her hair was neatly tied up in a bun. Her face was lightly made up. But her eyes, when she looked at Mr. Tan, were full of assessment. Tao quickly glanced him up and down. The old man in front of her. The old, faded jacket. His worn leather shoes and calloused hands. In her eyes, Mr. Tan looked nothing like a potential customer. Trying to maintain a professional appearance, Tao spoke in a polite but somewhat cold tone. "Good afternoon, sir. How may I assist you?" Mr. Tan smiled gently, not noticing the coldness in her voice. "Good afternoon. I'd like to take a look at the Rolls-Royce Phantom." Hearing the name Phantom, Tao frowned slightly. She knew this was Hyundai's top-of-the-line car. Rolls-Royce, not Hyundai, had a starting price of 10 billion dong. Not to mention the personalization options. She couldn't help but doubt whether this old man truly understood the value of the car he was talking about. "Sir, are you aware of the price of the Phantom?" Tao asked, her voice laced with insinuation. Mr. Tan paid no attention to her attitude, maintaining his calm tone. "I know. I've researched it. I'd like to see the car in person." Tao gave a thin smile, trying to maintain politeness. "Sir, the Rolls-Royce Phantom isn't a car that just anyone can afford. This is a car reserved for special clients. Are you sure you want to buy it?" Tao's words, though not direct, were clearly contemptuous. Her gaze at Mr. Tan, as if to say he didn't belong there. Mr. Tan paused for a moment. Though he was used to judging eyes and sarcastic words throughout his life, this contempt still stung his heart. However, he didn't let it rattle him. He looked Tao directly in the eye. His voice soft but firm. "I'm not here to play games. I've worked my whole life, and I can afford this car. So, can you show me the car?" Tao was momentarily stunned by the firmness in Mr. Tan's gaze. But instead of relenting, she sneered, stepping back slightly and crossing her arms. "Sir, our showroom doesn't offer tours for customers who aren't serious. The cars here aren't just expensive, but also symbols of status. If you want to see the cars, I'm afraid we need to know more about your financial capabilities." Tao's words were like a knife, cutting into Mr. Tan's self-respect. But he maintained his composure. His eyes only betrayed a fleeting flash of hurt. He took a deep breath, trying to suppress the hurt. "You don't need to ask that," he said, his voice low but firm. "I just want to see the car I intend to buy. I don't need anyone judging me by my appearance." Tao smirked. "I'm afraid, sir, appearances matter when it comes to a brand like Rolls-Royce. But if you really want, I can call the manager to handle this." Without waiting for Mr. Tan's reply, Tao turned and walked briskly towards the manager's office, leaving him standing there in the middle of the vast, glittering showroom. But cold and intimidating. Mr. Tan felt the disparity acutely. He didn't belong in this space. Not because he couldn't afford it, but because of the looks and prejudices that he'd faced all his life. But this time, he wasn't going to leave quietly. He stood there, quietly waiting, his gaze firmer than ever. "I didn't come here to be looked down upon," he thought to himself. "They'll have to know that I'm not inferior to anyone." While Mr. Tan waited, Tao returned with a half-hearted expression, half condescending. She didn't bring the manager out as she'd said, but instead resumed her conversation with him, as if testing his patience. "Sir, I'm afraid our showroom isn't a place for casual browsing." She spoke, her voice laced with sarcasm. "Rolls-Royces like the Phantom are not just modes of transportation. They are symbols of class. Reserved for those who truly understand. And can afford to own them. Mr. Ton looked at her, his gaze unwavering. Though accustomed to words tinged with contempt like these throughout his life, he still felt his self-respect challenged. "Do you think I came here to joke?" he asked, his voice low but sharp. "I've lived over 75 years. I don't need anyone to teach me what class or value is. I came here because I want to buy a Rolls-Royce Phantom. Not to be judged." Tao raised an eyebrow slightly, as if she couldn't believe what she just heard. She crossed her arms, her eyes flicking down to Mr. Ton's worn shoes, and then back up to his worn jacket. "Sir, not everyone can own a Rolls-Royce. The Phantom you're referring to has a starting price of over 40 billion VND. Not including personalization costs. Do you know that?" Mr. Ton nodded, his voice calm. But he couldn't hide his weariness at the girl's attitude. "I know. I did my research before coming here. If you don't want to help, call someone else. I don't want to waste my time." Tao scoffed, leaning down to her desk, and pretended to be busy with some paperwork. "Sir, in our showroom, we usually only serve truly potential customers. If you can't prove your financial capabilities, I'm afraid I can't continue to assist you." Tao's words echoed like an alarm bell in Mr. Ton's heart. Throughout his life, he had encountered countless condescending looks. But this attitude still stung. He looked at the young woman before him, not with anger, but with pity for her narrow-mindedness. "Do you think that just by looking at someone's appearance, you can judge a person?" he asked, his voice calm but edged with sharpness. "Do you know that wealth isn't just about the clothes people wear, or the shoes they wear? Those things are just superficial." Tao smirked, her face still full of complacency. "Sir, I'm not saying appearances are everything. But customers here don't usually come in wearing attire like yours." Mr. Ton sighed softly. His gaze drifted into the distance, as if images from the years he had endured contempt came flooding back. He hadn't come here to argue. But he also couldn't remain silent when his self-respect was being trampled on. "You're young, you probably don't understand the meaning of hard work yet." He spoke softly, but his words carried weight. "I've lived a life of honest work. Raised my son to be successful, without needing anyone to judge me or give me respect. Today, I came here to buy a car I want, not to hear judgments." Tao momentarily felt guilty in the face of Mr. Ton's firm words, but still didn't abandon her sarcastic attitude. "Well then, sir, if you really want to buy, I'm afraid we'll need proof of funds. We can't let just anyone walk in here and waste our staff's time." Those words were like a knife that cut into Mr. Ton's self-respect. He didn't respond immediately, just looking at the young woman in front of him, with a look of both sadness and firmness. "You don't need to test my capabilities," he said slowly. "I don't need to prove anything to anyone. If you don't want to serve me, let me see the manager." Tao was speechless for a moment. She didn't think Mr. Ton would be so calm and resolute. But before she could answer, the door burst open, and a familiar figure walked in. Mr. Ton's son, in an expensive suit and an imposing manner, walked straight towards his father. Huang's eyes swept over Tao, then stopped at Mr. Ton's face, where he recognized the hurt that his father was trying to hide. He didn't need to ask. He knew what had just happened. And he decided he wouldn't let it go easily. Hong walked into the showroom. Light reflecting off his suit. His impeccably tailored suit made the room seem to still. Huang's powerful gait and cold eyes made the staff and customers in the showroom unconsciously turn to look. With the charisma of a successful businessman, Hong quickly captured everyone's attention. When his eyes met his father, Mr. Tan, the man who had sacrificed his whole life for him, Hong frowned slightly. Although his father tried to remain calm, he could still see the fatigue and sadness in his eyes. Hong immediately strode forward, his voice ringing out clearly. "What happened? Why don't you look happy?" "Dad." Mr. Tan looked up at his son. Shook his head slightly, trying to hide the hurt. "It's nothing, son, just a little misunderstanding." But Hong wasn't easily convinced. He turned to Tao. His eyes sharp as knives. "You were serving my father, weren't you? My father came here to look at cars. Can you explain why he wasn't treated well?" Tao froze. Her face paled slightly as she realized the man in front of her wasn't an ordinary customer. With his expensive suit and powerful gaze, Hong exuded the aura of someone with power and status. She stammered. I only asked him a few questions to verify his information. To make sure he was genuinely interested in this car." Hong interrupted, his voice low but commanding. "Interested? My father walked in here and asked to see a Rolls-Royce Phantom. A car he intends to buy. And you thought your job was to judge him by his appearance." The entire showroom fell silent. A few other staff members started to pay attention to the conversation. And nearby customers also glanced over curiously. Tao lowered her head, trying to explain herself. "I didn't mean it that way. I just thought that he didn't look like the customers we usually serve." Tao's unintentional words angered Hong even more. He smirked, taking a step closer to her. "Unlike what you think. All your customers have to wear designer suits and expensive shoes to be considered worthy of entering here. Do you know who my father is? He's the man who worked his whole life to raise me, taught me how to live right. And he is the reason I can stand here today. He doesn't need any of you to judge his worth." To judge his worth. Tao paled and didn't dare look directly at Hong. I didn't know. I'm sorry." At that moment, the showroom manager, Mr. Khan, heard the commotion and hurried out. Mr. Khan was a middle-aged man, smart in a gray suit. Seeing Hong, he immediately recognized the important guest. "Hello, Mr. Hong, it's a pleasure to see you here. Is there a problem?" Hong turned to Mr. Khan, his gaze icy. "Yes, there is a problem. And it concerns how your staff treated my father." Mr. Khan glanced over at Mr. Tan, noting the stark contrast between his simple appearance and Huang's imposing demeanor. Immediately understanding the problem, Mr. Khan tried to defuse the situation. "I sincerely apologize for any inconvenience. Our staff may have misunderstood. I promise to serve you personally, to ensure the best possible experience." But Hong didn't let the easy apology slide. He emphasized each word, his voice ice-cold. "Apologies don't solve the problem. If my father wasn't my father, would you be standing here apologizing? How did your staff treat him before I arrived? And I want to know, if you train your staff, that customers are only worthy of respect when they are wearing expensive clothes, or not." Mr. Khan looked a little flustered, trying to maintain his composure. "I understand your frustration. We will deal with this internally immediately. And ensure that situations like this don't happen again. Again. Hong didn't look satisfied. He looked over at Tao, who was still looking down. Today. My father came here to fulfill a lifelong dream. But your staff made him feel disrespected. Do you think? How can a brand like Rolls-Royce maintain its reputation if it continues to treat customers like this? Mr. Tan placed his hand on Huang's shoulder. His voice was soft but firm. It's all right, son. I don't need this car anymore. I've lived long enough to understand that true respect doesn't come from luxury goods. Mr. Tan's words calmed Hong down. But he still couldn't let things end easily. He turned to Mr. Khan, his voice firm. I won't be buying a car here today. Not because I can't. But because I don't want my father to be trampled on by shallow prejudices. Good luck to you and your staff. With the customers you deem worthy. Hong took his father's hand and left the showroom with him. The atmosphere inside froze. Everyone watched the two figures, father and son, depart without daring to speak. The glass doors closed automatically behind them. But Huang's words still resonated in the luxurious, high-class space. Isn't something you show with outward appearances, but by how we treat others. Mr. Tan and his son stepped out of the Rolls-Royce showroom. But the story doesn't end there. On the way home, Mr. Tan gently squeezed his son's hand. His eyes were calm but full of meaning. Hong, you didn't need to defend me like that. I didn't go there to be recognized. I went there for my dream. Regardless of how they treated me. The important thing is, I dared to do something I never thought I would. Hong stopped. He looked at his father with understanding and regret. I know, Dad. But I couldn't let anyone disrespect you. The man who sacrificed his whole life to raise me. I couldn't stay silent when I saw them judging you based on appearances alone. Mr. Tan smiled. His face held the calmness of someone who had seen a lot. Son. True respect doesn't come from arguing or winning arguments, but from how we maintain our self-respect, regardless of how others perceive us. I still feel proud that today I walked into that place with my head held high. As the two of them were preparing to return to their taxi, Huang's phone suddenly rang. Looking at the screen, he recognized it as Mr. Khan's number, the showroom manager. Hong frowned, but still answered the phone. Hello, this is Hong. Mr. Khan's voice on the other end of the line sounded rather urgent. Mr. Hong. I am very sorry for what happened today. I have reviewed the entire incident. And absolutely cannot condone the attitude of our staff. I hope you and your father can return to the showroom, so that we have the opportunity to make things right. Hong was silent for a few seconds, his eyes on Mr. Tan. I don't think we need to go back. Dad. I'm disappointed enough with how you treated him. Mr. Khan quickly responded. I understand. But this isn't just about selling a car. It's about our honor and responsibility. We want to prove that we know how to respect those who deserve it. And your father is one of them. Hong hung up the phone, but Mr. Tan just smiled faintly. They are trying to correct their mistake. But Dad doesn't think we need to go back there. Hong nodded, but after a moment of thought, he replied. No, Dad, I think you should go back. Not because they deserve it, but because you deserve it. You deserve to walk in there with all the respect you always deserved. We will not let the prejudice of any AI prevent you from achieving what you want. Mr. Tan was speechless at his son's words. After a moment of thought, he nodded. When Mr. Tan and his son returned to the showroom, the atmosphere in the showroom had completely changed. Mr. Khan stood waiting at the door, bowing, greeting them respectfully. "Sir, Mr. Hong. I represent the entire team here. Offer our sincerest apologies. We made a grave mistake in judging you by your appearance." Mr. Tan said nothing, just nodded slightly. But his eyes remained calm. No longer the hurt look from before. Tao, the employee who had been contemptuous, stood at the back. Her face was pale. She stepped forward and bowed deeply. "Sir, I sincerely apologize for my behavior. I was wrong to let prejudice cloud how I treated you. I hope you can forgive me." Mr. Tan looked at her for a moment, then said softly, "You are young, you need to understand that. People are not defined by their appearance or the amount of money they wear. What makes a person valuable is how they live and contribute. I hope you remember this lesson." Mr. Khan personally led Mr. Tan and Hong to the area, displaying the Rolls-Royce Phantom, the mysterious black car, with the gleaming Spirit of Ecstasy logo on the hood, stood there as a symbol of pride and class. "Sir, this is the car you were interested in. We will assist you in personalizing every detail to your liking. And we are committed to serving you with the utmost respect." Mr. Tan stepped closer and placed his hand on the cool metal of the car. In that moment, all the hurt, the disdainful looks he had endured, seemed to dissipate. "Son, I think this is what I want. Not because of the car, but because of what it represents. My self-respect and resilience." Hong looked at his father, beaming. "Dad, you deserve all the best." That day, Mr. Tan and his son left the showroom with the respect of the entire staff. The Rolls-Royce Phantom, with a personalized license plate, became the most meaningful gift of his life. For Mr. Tan, it was not just a car, but a symbol of a resilient father and a son who always cherished his father's sacrifices. That day, Mr. Tan didn't just leave the showroom with a Rolls-Royce Phantom, but also a deep sense of pride. It wasn't pride from owning a luxury car, but because he had overcome all prejudice, all the disdainful looks to affirm his worth. When he returned home, Hong, with his role as a highly influential businessman, posted an article on social media. He recounted his father's story. "Today, I witnessed my father, who has dedicated his entire life to sacrifice and hard work, entered a luxury showroom to fulfill a lifelong dream. But instead of being treated with respect, my father was judged by his appearance. My father doesn't need a Rolls-Royce to prove himself. But I want the world to know that people like my father deserve to be respected. His efforts, his sacrifices, and his resilience are the reason I have today. Class isn't about appearance or wealth, but in how we treat others." Hopefully, this story will be a lesson for all of us. Huang's post quickly went viral, with hundreds of thousands of likes and shares. Many people expressed their admiration for Mr. Tan's resilience and Huang's gratitude towards his father. Sympathetic comments flooded in. "Your father is an unsung hero. People like him deserve the utmost respect." A big lesson for all brands. Never judge a person by their appearance. Thank you for sharing this story. This isn't just about the car, but about self-respect and human worth. Even the Rolls-Royce brand officially spoke out, issuing an apology to Mr. Tan, and committed to improving their service quality to prevent similar incidents from happening again. A few days later, Mr. Khan The showroom manager personally sent a handwritten letter to Mr. Tan's home. In the letter, Mr. Khan expressed his deep regret and thanked Mr. Tan for teaching them a valuable lesson. Dear Mr. Tan, your resilience and self-respect are a great lesson for us. Your story has changed how we perceive the value of each customer. I hope you will give us another opportunity to serve you in the best possible way. When the story died down, Mr. Tan continued his simple life. But now he felt more complete. The Rolls-Royce Phantom wasn't just a gift, but a symbol of self-respect that he had cherished all his life. Mr. Tan would often sit in that car, looking out the window with a contemplative gaze, and teach his grandchildren. True wealth isn't about what you have, but how you live. How you respect others and yourself. No matter how successful Hong became, he always remembered his father's teachings. He continued to share this story during speaking engagements, not only to remind himself, but to inspire others. One afternoon, Hong invited his father for a drive in the Rolls-Royce. On the open road, golden sunlight streaming through the windows, Mr. Tan looked at his son and smiled softly. You know, I don't need this car to feel proud. My greatest pride is you, Hong. You are my life's greatest achievement. Hong turned to his father, his voice choked with emotion. And me. My greatest pride is being your son. The Rolls-Royce glided along the tree-lined road, carrying the image of the father and son. A symbol of love, self-respect, and resilience that transcends all prejudice. The story doesn't just end with a car, but is a lesson about the true value of a person.